I am so excited to be here in this conversation with all of you. I really think this is an important moment for our movement and the work we're doing together. I think you are all going to make a huge impact using these tools. So the first thing I want to talk about is how stopping fossil fuel ads can help stop climate change. So if you go to the next slide, you will see a graph of carbon emissions. Right now, the world is emitting more carbon per year than it ever has. That number sometimes goes down year to year, but it's pretty much nonstop going up. Next slide, please. This shows a graph of cigarette consumption in the United States up until around 1970. As you can see, this actually looks a lot like that carbon graph. It dips down every now and then, but it's mostly going pretty much straight up. But in 1970, the United States banned cigarette ads on radio and television. Go to the next slide, and you'll see what happens next. After that ban happens, the number goes down, the amount of consumption goes down dramatically. And what you can see in this graph is not just that consumption goes down, but there begins to be the possibility of having meaningful government action to limit the consumption of cigarettes or where you could smoke them. Without that power of persuasion, of advertising behind them, the ability of the tobacco industry to stave off government regulation and action becomes a lot harder. And our thinking is that if we can do the same thing for fossil fuels, we can do fossil fuel advertising, we can do the same thing for fossil fuel consumption. That's the reason why we think stopping fossil fuel ads is relevant to stopping climate change. But now I want to talk about, on the next slide, why taking a pledge to not work with fossil fuels is good for agencies, which is the core thing that we're asking our leaders inside these companies to do. So the first reason on the next slide is team culture is a competitive advantage. You know that young people have been marching in literally historic numbers to try and stop climate change. This is an issue that dramatically affects younger generations more than older. And those young people are the core of a talent-based industry. They're the people who are best at making TikToks, to be really blunt about it. And that young workforce is really concerned about this issue and really wants to see their workplace align with their values. The next reason on the next slide is that fossil fuel clients put your agency on the wrong side of major cause campaigns. So to provide an example of this, the agency the brand Tazo was working with the agency Edelman on a campaign that was trying to plant trees in communities affected by refinery pollution, which is a great campaign, actually. Cleaner air in environmental justice communities is wonderful. But at the same time, because they had fossil fuel clients, they were working with the American fuel and petrochemical manufacturers, who were the lobbying organization that was trying to get more pollution to come out of the refineries in those communities where they were planting trees. So Edelman ended up in a conflict of interest between those two, where they had Tazo, they were trying to do good, and then they had the fossil fuel client, and they ended up doing bad. So on the next slide, you can see how greenwashing is actually quite harmful to your actual green clients. So here's an example where having advertisements that promise false solutions by fossil fuel companies dilutes the impact of genuine efforts to make change. These kinds of ads, greenwashing, introduce cynicism, and they make it harder for consumers to identify real solutions. So you have a brand like Seventh Generation, which is actually investing in recycled materials, and you have BP, which is not investing in cleaning up their business, but they use the same style, and the impact on consumers is either, I can't tell the difference between these two things, or everybody makes this stuff up. Why should I care about any of these claims? And then on the next slide, I want to talk about the energy transition that we're going through. If you're a company like GM that is trying to go sell 100% electric vehicles within about a decade, they need government policy, like the policy that's being debated in Congress right now. But their agency works at the same time with Saudi Aramco, which is one of the world's largest oil companies. And Saudi Aramco needs to make sure that those laws that GM needs don't pass, because their business models are in conflict. So running those campaigns for Aramco is actually making it harder for GM, your agency's other client, in order to be able to accomplish their business goals. And then on the last slide, I just want to talk about how the regulatory and legal risks are growing. There's a number of legal actions, either in regulatory agencies, like the Federal Trade Commission here in the United States, or in Congress or other legislative bodies that are taking action to limit the impact of greenwashing claims and to hold people accountable for lying to the public in this way. And then there are also lawsuits in many different cities and states. We're actually tracking over 1,800 lawsuits about climate change worldwide, many of which actually involve misleading statements by agencies. And so basically, if you are part of an agency that is working for these fossil fuel clients, there is a real risk that your colleagues will have to be caught up in these legal disputes, which it's annoying to have to pay lawyers and like really uncomfortable to be caught up in those, but it also is a reputational risk. It's just not fun to be subpoenaed. So those are some of the reasons that we think this is actually a good idea for agencies, that there's a real risk of not taking this pledge. And so this is the core of the case that we're asking you to begin trying to make to your colleagues in your agency and in your industry. And so if we go to the next slide, I am excited to say that there's a real movement growing around this, that there's now over 350 agencies that have taken the pledge not to work with fossil fuels. There's over 1,000 individuals that have taken the pledge not to work with fossil fuels. And that's a really good sign that this is right. This is an issue that if you're in the advertising industry, you want to talk about sustainability, you can't avoid this. So if you read any of the news after the Cannes ad or Festival of Creativity, you saw that Greenpeace and other organizations made a really big deal about this. And I think we're at a point where people realize this isn't going away. And that's an opportunity to actually begin to make change. So, and then the last thing I think this is relevant, why I think this is important is that, you know, I live in Texas, I'm seeing the impacts of climate change every day. And chances are you're looking outside and you're seeing them too. It's just hotter than it's ever been. It's more dangerous. There are more fires, there are more floods. And I think the time has really passed where we can assume that other people, you know, don't see this or aren't thinking about it. People are thinking about it every day, and that creates a moment of transformation as well. So I'm excited to introduce a video from someone I admire a great deal, which is Bill McKibben, who recorded a message for everybody who is here on this call today.
Hello, everybody. This is Bill McKibben. What a pleasure to get to speak with you and on behalf of Clean Creatives, because I think this work that you all are about could not be more important. And I'm really glad to get to join my old colleague and friend Duncan Meisel in this work. Look, I'm not as creative as you all are, but I've written 20-some books now, I guess, and 2 of them are novels anyway, so they call that creative writing. It's as good as I'm going to get anyway. And it's enough for me to know, in a way, how we think sometimes. There's a great premium in the creative world on individuality, on being your own person, and that's good. That's an essential, maybe the essential part of what we do. But when it comes to the work of making change, especially on issues as huge, all-encompassing as the climate crisis engulfing us, then the most important thing an individual can do is be a little less of an individual, join together with others in movements large enough to make a difference. And I've spent my life building some of those movements. Right now, this work we're doing at Third Act for people over the age of 60, tell your grandparents about us. But I think that this work at Clean Creatives offers the perfect opportunity for people to be both their creative self and part of something big enough to really matter. We're all citizens of different things, our town, our state, our country, and frankly of our industry, even of our company. And an enormous part of being a citizen is wanting to be really proud of that which you are a citizen of. We all want to be proud of the people we work with, the company we work for, the industry that we're a part of. And that means in this case, taking responsibility for helping make sure that this industry, which harnesses the extraordinary brains of so many people, is in touch with the great imperative of our kind, our time, the imperative of doing something to bring the fossil fuel industry under control before literally it breaks the planet. I know that y'all have, I know that it's hard sometimes to speak out in one's workplace. And certainly something I've dealt with over the years. And it does take, it does put a certain lump in your throat once in a while. On the other hand, when you do it, it's an integral part of building, well, building the kind of workplace that you want to be in. And in this case, you've got lots and lots of allies. Clean Creatives is building out these small but vocal teams that network across agencies. It's a kind of movement, but with many nodes. And that kind of power, that kind of network power, has extraordinary ability to make change. When I started something called 350.org that became the first big global grassroots climate change movement, it was composed of thousands of nodes. Our first day of action, we had 5,000 protests, 5,100 protests in 181 countries around the world at the same time. Most of them weren't big, but taken together, they're extraordinarily powerful. So you're not alone in wanting to do this. There are 1,000 people who've signed this Clean Creatives Pledge. Many, many more people in so many other industries who are doing just the same thing. You should be proud of being part of this work and do it so that you can be proud of all the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for being part of it. And I look forward very much to seeing at least some of you down the road. Many, many thanks.
So in the spirit of that, here is the pledge that we are asking agencies to take. Our agency will decline any future contracts with fossil fuel companies, trade associations, and front groups. If you go to cleancreatives.org/list, you'll see a detailed breakdown of what companies are included under this pledge that we're asking people not to work with. And then if you go to the next slide, we're going to get into how we think you can make this change. It may seem obvious that working with the companies that cause, literally 90% of global carbon pollution is a bad idea, but there's actually a lot that goes into building momentum to make the change. So I'm going to pass it now to TJ and Tom, who have been working very hard on this on the toolkit and are a crucial piece of the team that brought us to this point of having this webinar to launch. So thank you both.
So just going to quickly introduce myself and Tom. I'm a creative at Fleishman Hillard UK, which is part of Omnicom. And Tom, before we dive into stuff, do you want to quickly introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so I'm also part of Fleishman Hillard UK. So we've been working with TJ for the past couple of years.
Great. So we started organizing our agency about 2 years ago now, after a conversation that I had with our joint CEOs at a town hall when I asked them, do we have anything in place to do with environmental policy? Not specifically asking around climate policy at the time. And the answer was shocking. And it was basically no, and there was no shame in it. And I sulked about it for a while and then came back a few months later with a bit of a plan. And I was asked to set up a climate action group. And it was only over time that I realized, by looking at what work like Clean Creatives were doing, that actually the most important part of what we could put together was suggesting a new climate policy. And over time, that's what we've managed to do. We've managed to set up a new climate policy that went all the way through Omnicom Legal, and it's not the full pledge. For a massive agency like us, that takes a long time, but we've had experience of getting through some of that journey and learning how to play the game to get to the right situation, put pressure in the right times in the right ways. And that got us really excited about wanting to share that experience. Tom, I don't know if you want to pick up from there.
Yeah, so part of why we've written this guide is about people that are in a similar position to us, where you're starting from scratch essentially, and we want to be able to help people not not to have to go in blind, and to have a really fantastic resource that supports you all the way. So I suppose one of the first things to mention, I'm sure TJ would agree with me, is that this isn't easy. It is a process, and obviously when you're working with an industry as huge and as powerful as a PR company, things don't happen overnight, and it really does take commitment. But when you have that commitment, you really start to see progress. And that is really, really rewarding to see you start to make that progress and really start to get towards this goal that we're working towards. And I suppose what it is for me that keeps me going and makes me continue to fight for this despite being up against it. So I'm kind of a biologist by training, I suppose, and I kind of come at this from a bit of a biodiversity perspective. And for me, the climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, they're so interlinked. And if we can solve the climate crisis, we go a huge way towards solving everything that's kind of wrong with the world. And a huge part of that is by cutting off the supply chain from the advertising and PR industries to fossil fuel companies. And another part is I like to win. I don't want to lose. And we're in a fight against fossil fuel industry, and also partly against our own industry. And we have to keep fighting, and if we do, we will win. TJ, I don't know if you want to speak a bit about what keeps you going, what keeps you motivated.
Yeah, well, to be honest, it takes me on to like the next point that we wanted to make anyway. That we took our lessons from that experience, then we created this guide. And kind of what keeps me going, and what we wanted to say anyway, coming up to this point, is just, it's the community. So thank you for being here. Like the first of the 5 core principles that like runs through this guide is you are not alone. You have allies at your agency and at agencies around you. And we've not seen a single instance whilst being part of Clean Creatives, and Duncan would say the same thing from the people that he's worked with throughout the time, and anyone else as part of Clean Creatives, that we've not seen a single instance of someone at an agency joining Clean Creatives and then finding no support from any of their colleagues. There's always a place to begin the conversation, and then good that can come from it. So today, that's why we're inviting you to get involved, start the conversation, download the toolkit, reach out to some colleagues on the same page, and just start things going. Because however small that might feel at the start, like that's what's going to get us going.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. And you can see those 5 principles up on the screen now. More is more. You are not alone. We're going to touch on these, and we'll hear more from Tom and TJ again in a little bit, and they're going to walk through kind of how the toolkit is set up to support you all in launching these teams and getting your agencies to sign this pledge. But let's start there, right? Let's start with a conversation. We have the next iteration of the F list, so the list of all of the agencies that are still working with fossil fuel companies. That's going to be coming out in just a few short weeks, months out this fall. So now is really the perfect opportunity to start this conversation at your agency. And as Tom and TJ mentioned, the toolkit has everything you need to get started. And it's really as simple as that. Host a conversation with some of your colleagues. So we're going to move into breakout rooms just a minute to get started. And what I would suggest in these breakout rooms is up on the screen. So just 2 points here. Why did you get involved, right? Like what brings you personally to Clean Creatives? We heard TJ's story, we heard Tom's story of like what brought them to this pledge, what brought them to take action. And then the second piece here, begin to brainstorm with each other who might be like 4 to 5 people that you could reach out to in the next couple of weeks and find some time to join a conversation. You could use this toolkit to be an excuse for that, right? Or reaching out to a couple of people who might agree with you that climate change is an issue, and that greenwashing and the work that your agency is doing might be a piece of that. Could they join a conversation with you to take a look at this toolkit and talk about what Clean Creatives is all about? Let me pass it back to Tom and TJ so that they can preview this toolkit a bit. And we'll start by looking at the section on how we start these conversations. That's step number 1.
Yeah, in the toolkit, the way that we've kind of broken this down is into 5 key steps. So the first of those is, how we actually get the conversation started in the first place. What do you need to lay the groundwork, as it were. So one of the most important things, obviously, to kick things off is just be familiar with the climate crisis, be familiar with the topic area that we're talking about. And I'm sure that, if you guys are on this call, you're here because you're already really engaged in the issue. You already will be super engaged and super gemmed up. But it's about making sure that it's really up-to-date knowledge, and also about making sure that it's specific to not just the climate crisis more broadly, but specific to the PR advertising industry and how that relates to the climate crisis, making sure that you're really close. And the kind of things that Duncan was speaking about at the start of this talk. So how are we implicit? What can we do to solve it? So also getting really familiar with your agency's values and commitments is essential before you start making these conversations. It allows you to find areas that you can kind of exploit, or start thinking, oh, hold on, that doesn't quite match up to what we, our actions here don't match up to what we state our values and beliefs are. So find everything that you can that speaks about, obviously, your climate commitments and your sustainability commitments, but also things like DE&I. They're such interconnected issues. Any sort of injustice, you can find ways to look at the links between the two. If you have a really strong DE&I policy, then climate justice should be part of that. And then as you start reaching out to people, do it with keep in mind the kind of relationships that you want to start building through those conversations. So one of the most important groups of relationships that we say you can start to build is this idea of your true unit. So these are your kind of ride and die, really close folks that you keep super close to you, and this is your core team. So your committed few. So you want to try and find maybe 3 or 4 people, and these are your people that are here for the long run. They're going to put as much effort in as you are. They want to see change, and really this should be something that's quite unofficial. And TJ and I have found this, and I think this is how we've actually ended up working with Clean Creatives. Once you have something that's official and it's monitored by your management team, your senior leadership team, it actually makes it much harder to be more radical and make fast progress. And you're suddenly accountable to people way above you that aren't necessarily working against you, but don't necessarily want to work at the pace or with the same ambition as you do. Another thing is just making relationships with your supporters. So this is anyone in your agency that is supportive of your idea and your cause. They're not necessarily the same people that are going to be in your true unit or your core team. They're not the people that are there day in, day out with the commitment, but these are people that share the same values as you. They'll put their voice behind yours. They'll put their name down. The theory of change behind all of this is that more is more. If you have more people, you'll make more ground. You'll do it more quickly. And I think it's really important that you try and connect with a really diverse group when you're doing this. So that means obviously race, gender, sexual identity, but also age. People are placed within the business. So you want to try and find people at junior level, similar levels to you, but also senior level. Make sure that you have representation from across the company. And a last group of people that's important to start building relationships with is your decision makers. So these are the people that are really going to move the needle for you. These are the people that actually have power to make the changes that you want to see. And it's very easy to see these as the bad guys, I suppose, but it's important to have a really healthy relationship with this. You need to have a dialogue, and it has to be a healthy dialogue. So through the guide, we suggested a few different ways that you can start making these, having these conversations and start building these relationships. So, first off, just start talking. It can be really casual. So you bump into a colleague that you know quite well when you're making a coffee, or when you're getting a drink, or you're in the elevator, and just think, hey, have you thought about what our stance is on this? What do you think about that? Do you think we could go further? And about finding people that share those values and those commitments that you do. And once you have that, start looking for, once you've kind of got your arguments and you know how you're going to put these forward, and finding staff-wide forums, so you can start building your numbers. This is how you find your supporters. These are the people to start backing your ideas. And as well, really important to try and find your a bit of senior heft to get on your side. So the most high-ranking person you can find that is really going to back your ideas. So not someone that's going to half on board and is just kind of listening in to see what you're doing, but someone that's really out there and really keen to get behind you and help support you with what you're doing. These are integral to getting in the room with those decision makers and helping you build your relationship with them. It's like your mutual friend, if you like. So also throughout the guide, we've suggested a few resources that you can use to help you make this sort of progress. So you'll find links throughout that will send you to things like trainings you can have for your company, resources groups. So obviously there's Clean Creatives, but there's also groups like Purpose Disruptors, for example. You connect with people from across agencies and across the industry in similar ways to that. And also resources for things like data points, things to help back up your business cases. And all of this ladders up to help step 2, which is building your business case. We're not going to touch on that now, but getting there.
Wicked. So last couple of points on we've got as sort of sneak peek into the guide. You can see here on the screen one of the examples of little stories that are kind of peppered throughout the guide of real quotes from real people who've been on this journey or are on this journey, just to make sure that this is real. People are doing this. You're one of them. You're part of a community, and that's really important. From what I said earlier, personally, that's something that I find incredibly motivating. So I hope that those, we've tried to find a range of things, of quotes from people to resonate with as many people as possible. And you'll also see invitations throughout that guide to join us on our Clean Creative Slack. So if you guys don't know about that already, I'm sure, the link is in the guide, but links will hopefully be going in the chat as well. I'm sure they're all on follow-ups from Laura. She'll be peppering you to make sure that you're getting on there. So don't worry about that. And basically, we want as many of you guys to join the conversation on there and share what's working, what you're learning, make sure that the movement is being as connected as possible, and also give us feedback on this guide. This is a living, breathing document. It's had a lot of different input into it so far from lots of different people. To Tom's point, it's really important that we have diverse perspectives on this, but also, we know that there's always more to learn. And for us to add to this guide, we see this as something that is shared amongst all of us in the Clean Creatives community. So please don't hesitate to tell us what you want to see in there and what you think could change and make this better. But most importantly, just join the community, and we can all make sure that we're helping each other find those true units in our agency spaces, because that's actually what's going to make this move. Wicked. So you guys have all seen the link up there for ages in the chat. Let's just keep this going. It's been so inspiring to see people chatting and being really enthusiastic on the call this evening for us here in London anyway, and hearing what you guys brings you to Clean Creative. So don't hesitate to reach out to me and Tom, to Duncan, to Laura, to everyone else, and to each other, and just thank you so much for the time today, and let's get things moving.
Yeah. And there is some really exciting stuff happening on the horizon, actually. So the next thing that we are working to put together is the F list. And the F list is the list of agencies that work with fossil fuel companies. And it's the most comprehensive list of such that exists. And so that's going to be coming out at the end of September. And it's going to be a really great opportunity to begin this conversation inside your company and in your community. And so the sooner you have a true unit, the sooner you find that group of 3 or 4 people, the better position you'll be to take advantage of that moment. Last year, when we released it, it was a massive subject of conversation online, in the press, and it will probably be the same again. So that's, separate from the urgency we all feel about, the climate crisis and the climate emergency, and, me looking out my window and wondering if it's going to rain for the first time in 3 months, that kind of stuff. So that's happening. This is really escalating. The biggest part of I like to remind people that, the Cannes Festival of Creativity is supposed to be the moment where the ad industry showcases its best work to the world. But the most shared content coming out of Cannes was about fossil fuels, was about agencies' work with climate polluters. Literally, the most shared content came from Clean Creatives and Greenpeace. So this is really ripe. You're in the right place and you're having the right conversations at the right time. And I just want to emphasize this, that this is a really powerful moment. The last thing I'm just going to add is that you're going to be the first to find out about this, but we're opening a tip line to add to the F list. So this is just a place where you or your colleagues can share information about agencies' work with fossil fuels in an anonymous way. We don't accept confidential or information or protect information that's a business secret. But if there's public information about something that isn't on the F list, or that you know about, that you want us to know about, if you go to cleancreatives.org/tips, you can submit that to us and sort of provide little bits of proof that we can then use to put in the F list. So there isn't a lot of transparency in this issue, and across the industry, we're trying to provide that, but we need your help to do it. So that is my early reveal to you. And now I'm going to pass it off to Laura. I'm really grateful to everybody for joining this call.
I loved it. We got like a bonus launch within the launch. Thank you so much, Duncan. Just like huge thank you for like Duncan and Bill. That recorded video is so inspiring to me. Just like remind myself, like it's people power, and that, you all as creatives in this industry, like you are the people power in your agency. Like there's nothing more ripe than using this moment to be speaking out on this issue. Also, giant thank you for Tom and TJ, not just for putting together this toolkit, but taking time out of your work days, taking time in your evening to hop on, share a bit about what brought you to Clean Creatives, your experience with doing this work, and for walking us through the toolkit that you all spent many, many hours building and creating. So please join me in showing some appreciations for them in the chat. It would be great. And then lastly, pointing back to that F list, y'all, the vision I have here, just really briefly, we've got this kind of perfect timeline, right? We had Cannes, climate change, fossil fuels was like the discussion topic coming out of that. We've got this toolkit now, and with the F list launching soon is kind of the perfect window of time to be building these teams, getting groups going, and possibly, I don't know, planning some sort of events at your agencies, whether a like, woohoo, we're not on this list, an amazing, our agency has signed this pledge, that's incredible, or also maybe a sarcastic, woohoo, we're on this list, it's like time to get to work. I will be following up with all of you, myself or the other organizer on this team, Izzy, to answer questions, to support you in building these teams and using this toolkit to get started. But if you have questions in the meantime, please don't hesitate again to join us, to join the conversation in our Slack. You can reach out to me directly there and we'll get things going. So happy to end a little bit early, and thank you all so much for your time today, and can't wait to get started with each of you. Have a good night.